In August of 2023, Education Minister Lotta Edholm announced that Swedish schools would be phasing out EdTech and embracing more traditional practices like reading hard copy books and writing handwritten notes. Needless to say, this announcement was met with disbelief amongst the wider international public. Why would an entire country willingly forego those digital technologies, which are widely touted to be the future of education? In a recent survey, 92% of students worldwide reported having access to a computer at school. In New Zealand, 100% of schools are equipped with high-speed internet, while in Australia, the computer-to-student ratio has dipped below 1-to-1, meaning there are now more computers than students in school. In the US, government expenditure on digital learning products for state schools exceeds $60 billion annually. With these numbers, you'd think EdTech had clearly demonstrated a beneficial impact on student learning and development. Well, think again. An OECD international review of the impact of computers in education reports no appreciable improvements in student achievement in reading, mathematics, or science in countries that had invested heavily in computers for education. Students who use computers very frequently at school do a lot worse in most learning outcomes, and perhaps the most disappointing finding of this report is that technology is of little help in bridging the skills divide between advantaged and disadvantaged students. After reviewing 126 research studies exploring technology-based education interventions, the Global Research Center JPAL concluded, initiatives that expand access to computers do not improve K-12 grades and test scores. Furthermore, online courses lower academic achievement compared to in-person courses. A recent analysis investigating the impact of computers on reading performance amongst K-12 students across the U.S. concludes, even small daily amounts of use of digital devices in classrooms, 30 minutes, are negatively related to scores on a reading comprehension test. A similar analysis of learning moderators within tertiary settings concludes, expanding the use of technology at the expense of other forms of instruction is likely to have detrimental effects on achievement. Yet another set of analyses reveals that investing in air conditioning has a more beneficial impact on student learning than investing in a laptop for every student. Perhaps Larry Cuban, Emeritus Professor of Education at Stanford University, best summed up the state of affairs when saying, the introduction of computers into schools was supposed to improve academic achievement and alter how teachers taught. Neither of these things has occurred. The fact that robust research has done little to quell public excitement over digital technology in education suggests that we aren't dealing with an issue of evidence. Rather, we're dealing with an issue of ideology. Seeing as so many practitioners have constructed both their professional and personal identities upon the promise of a digital future for education, it's unlikely that exponents will ever bend in the face of negative data. Instead, just like gun control, climate change, and vaccinations, the issue of EdTech must be tackled at a more fundamental level. We must focus on the mechanisms behind why digital tools are so deleterious within schools if we ever hope to stall the current academic decline. The primary function of any tool is roughly defined as the manner in which 90% of people spend 90% of their time employing said tool. Consider a hammer. There are a myriad of uses for a hammer. Doorstop, bottle opener, back scratcher, screwdriver. However, 90% of people spend 90% of their time using this tool to hit things. As such, if I were to hand you a hammer, you'd almost certainly immediately begin looking for something to hit. So what is the primary function of a computer? When students sit down in front of a screen, what's the fundamental behavior that immediately jumps to mind? A pre-COVID survey exploring how U.S. students age 8 to 18 utilize digital technologies provides the answer. These values are per week. 10 hours 44 minutes playing video games, 10 hours 2 minutes watching television or film clips, 8 hours 14 minutes scrolling social media, 7 hours 32 minutes listening to music, 3 hours 25 minutes doing homework, 2 hours 5 minutes doing schoolwork, 1 hour 14 minutes reading for pleasure, 52.5 minutes creating digital content, and 14 minutes writing for pleasure. Do you see the issue? Accounting for the fact that school is only in session 36 weeks per year, this data suggests students spend nearly 200 hours annually using a computer for learning purposes. That's certainly impressive until you recognize they will spend over 2,000 hours annually using this same exact tool to rapidly jump between scattershot media content. This is why, when using a computer for homework, students typically last fewer than 6 minutes before accessing social media, messaging friends, or engaging with other digital distractions. This is why, when using a laptop during class, students typically spend 38 minutes of every hour off task. And this is why, when getting paid as part of a research study to focus on a 20-minute computerized lesson, nearly 40% of students were unable to stop themselves from multitasking. It's not that the students of today have abnormally weak constitutions, it's that they have literally spent thousands of hours training themselves to use digital devices to media multitask. Now don't misunderstand. Nobody has ever argued that computers can't be used for learning. The argument being made is that computers so often aren't used for learning that trying to shoehorn this function in places a very large and very unnecessary obstacle between the student and the desired outcome. In order to effectively learn while using a computer, students must expend an incredible amount of cognitive effort simply battling impulses they've spent years honing, a battle they lose more often than not. Now, to be fair, even without computers, students naturally struggle with a lack of attention, shallow thinking, overconfidence, and other inimical learning behaviors. However, with computers, the likelihood of these behaviors is far greater. Seeing as many schools already struggle with issues of engagement, why would we voluntarily throw a tool into the mix that exacerbates this problem while simultaneously harming, or at best, not helping, the ultimate goal of learning? Seeing as enthusiasts can't lean on empirical data or primary function to support the adoption of computers across education, they frequently turn to three seemingly compelling apologies. Luckily, when placed in context, these apologies lose a lot of their bite. Apology number one, computers have so much potential, or tech is the future. It's certainly easy to get swept up in the promise of computers in education. Returning to the JPAL review quoted earlier, after concluding that computers do not benefit learning, this group goes on to state, computer-assisted learning shows considerable promise, and against this backdrop, promising uses of educational technology have the potential to support massive inroads in learning. Potential is what something could be, what it should be, what it ought to be, not what it actually is. This means apologies from potential do not actually reflect reality. Rather, they reflect the faith, the belief, the desires of the apologist. In fact, when people say that computers have the potential to drive student learning, they are tacitly acknowledging that these tools are currently not achieving this aim. When potential is promoted above reality, the burden of proof swings from developers to practitioners, a swing which unfairly tasks individuals with disproving a fantasy. And if you've ever tried to convince a sports fanatic that their basement-dwelling team is simply no good, then you'll recognize that disproving a fantasy is impossible. No matter how much negative evidence accrues, potential will always remain unblemished as it exists in the mind, not on the ground. Now, I'm not arguing against having faith in computers. There is every chance that somebody will someday create a program that puts even the best teachers in the world to shame. I'm simply pointing out that this hasn't happened yet, and that promissory arguments aren't a solid enough foundation upon which to determine important matters of education. Luckily, this apology is easily circumvented by shifting the burden of proof back to its proper location. Schools should only be asked to consider adopting computer technologies once they've demonstrated unequivocal positive impact on learning. Furthermore, the task of conducting this research should be undertaken by the developers themselves. Forcing teachers to assume the role of product tester and students to assume the role of guinea pig wastes precious educational time and resources which could be spent in far more productive ways. Apology number two, computers are ubiquitous, or they ain't going nowhere. Driving, health insurance, taxes, video games, dating, marriage, and divorce, mortgages, laundry, student loans, litigation, self-defense, first aid, pet care, superannuation, yoga. I mention these things to highlight that just because something is ubiquitous does not mean it need be explicitly taught in schools. Teachers have long recognized that they are not alone in the journey of education and that many essential concepts are meant to be passed along by parents, peers, society, and life experience. Now, with that said, an argument could be made that schools should be teaching these ubiquitous subjects, that it's the responsibility of education to ensure all students are well-versed in those things they are certain to encounter in their adult lives. Honestly, this argument has some merit. However, to argue that a topic should be taught is far different than arguing that all things should be taught through that topic. The former is an argument about curriculum, the latter is an argument about pedagogy. For instance, you might believe we should teach table manners to students, curriculum, but that's different than arguing we should teach all classes in a dining room over dinner, pedagogy. Here is where the apology from ubiquity goes awry. Through some linguistic alchemy, the argument we should teach computer skills has morphed into we should teach all skills through a computer. This has led to an abundance of backward reasoning, such as this excerpt from a research paper exploring the impact of one-to-one computer programs in education. There's been a generation of criticism leveled at one-to-one laptop computer initiatives. We raise questions about what classrooms and schools need to look like in order to realize the advantages of one-to-one computing. In doing so, we present a theoretical vision for self-organizing schools in which laptop computers are essential tools. Notice that these authors aren't arguing that one-to-one computing has proven effective in schools. In fact, they acknowledge that it hasn't. They're arguing that schools need to be reconfigured in order for one-to-one computing to be effective. As to why it's so important that laptops become essential tools within education, the only conceivable answer is because they exist. Although teaching computer skills and digital etiquette is certainly a worthwhile goal, it doesn't follow that we must reconfigure all academic subjects to achieve this goal. When it comes to effective teaching and learning, we should select the tool best suited to the job, not the tool that's the most prevalent. Apology 3. Schools are using computers incorrectly, or it's all your fault. It seems nobody is immune to this argument. As referenced earlier, following a 3-year analysis of hundreds of thousands of data points and concluding that computers significantly harm learning, the OECD goes on to state, one interpretation of all this is that building deep conceptual understanding and higher order thinking requires intensive teacher-student interaction. But another interpretation is that we have not yet become good enough at the kind of pedagogies that make the most of technology. To argue that people aren't using a tool correctly is merely to argue that they aren't using it as the inventor intended. Now, to understand why this apology from blame is so flimsy, we need only turn to Socrates, who, through Plato, warned, "The inventor of an art is not always the best judge of the utility of that invention to the users of it." Robert Probst, inventor of the Action Office, intended his easily reconfigurable office dividers to promote employee productivity, privacy, and health. Of course, the Action Office was quickly renamed the Cubicle and became a way to maximize office space while lowering employee satisfaction and output, leading Probst to ultimately denounce his invention as monolithic insanity. Alfred Nobel, inventor of dynamite, intended his invention to be used only for industrial purposes and thought its incredible power would preclude it from ever being used in war. Of course, dynamite quickly became a source of military might and caused untold numbers of deaths, leading Nobel to establish his eponymous prize in promotion of peace. There is no doubt the engineers and programmers developing educational hardware and software have very specific intentions for how their tools should be utilized. Ultimately, however, though, these intentions are irrelevant. Once a tool makes it into the hands of the populace, it is they who decide how it will and will not be utilized. The user is the ultimate determiner of function. And when students spend over 90% of their time on computers media multitasking, then we can rest assured that this is the correct way to use the tool. But in the interest of digging deeper, let's give this apology the benefit of the doubt. If computers are in fact being used incorrectly in schools, then what is the correct way to use them? Well, as the OECD states, digital technology is linked to better student performance when computer software and internet connections help to increase study time and practice. In case you missed it, let me rephrase that. Learning improves when students spend more time learning. This revelation isn't unique to computers. Flashcards, workbooks, an empty milk jug, a box of wet ferrets, my great Aunt Justine. When used to increase study time and practice, literally any tool will improve student performance. The relevant question is whether or not computers actually do lead to increased learning time. Unfortunately, as we've already established, the answer to this is an unequivocal no. 2 decades of research have clearly demonstrated that cell phones do little to advance learning in the classroom, but a lot to disrupt it. So obvious has this fact become that even UNESCO has joined the ever-growing list of international bodies calling for a worldwide ban of phones within schools. Despite this, many educational institutions continue to allow students access to smartphones during school hours under 3 mistaken assumptions. Assumption number 1, smartphones help students build meaningful relationships. When human beings communicate face-to-face, the brain typically releases a hormone called oxytocin, a biological marker of social bonding and relationship formation. It's thanks in part to this molecule that in-person interaction commonly leads to feelings of safety, connectedness, and fellowship. Unfortunately, human biology doesn't appear to recognize text-based digital communication as a valid form of social interaction. When human beings communicate via messaging or social media, the brain typically does not release significant levels of oxytocin. It's thanks in part to the absence of this molecule that digital interaction commonly leads to feelings of loneliness, isolation, and anxiety. To make matters worse, when smartphone users begin feeling lonely, they often increase the amount of texting they do in order to combat this sensation, a sad case of mistaking the poison for the cure. Let's bring this back to schools. Surveys suggest that students spend approximately 43 minutes of an estimated 90 minutes of daily break time at school on their smartphone. That's nearly half of their free time necessarily not spent interacting face-to-face. And to make matters worse, these 43 minutes are rarely spent building relationships. Rather, the most common student break time activities are playing solo video games, scrolling social media, and listening to music. Meanwhile, in schools that have banned smartphone use, the most common student break time activities are walking with friends, playing games with friends, and reading books. Beyond the schoolhouse, the number of in-person weekly gatherings reported by U.S. teenagers has dropped from 2.6 in 2001, the year cell phones started accessing the internet, to 1.6 today. During this same period, the percentage of significant loneliness reported by U.S. teenagers has doubled, jumping from 18% to 36%. As a final nail in this coffin, nearly 43% of students report explicitly using their smartphone to avoid social interaction, a clear blow to the assumption that these tools are being used to build meaningful relationships in the classroom. Assumption number 2, allowing smartphones helps students learn how to use them appropriately. What exactly constitutes appropriate student smartphone use in schools? Whenever I ask teachers or administrators this question, the answer is always the same. Students should be able to refrain from looking at or using their phone during class time. Well, ignoring the fact that a simple ban would achieve this goal far easier, this assumption takes for granted that ignoring smartphones is an achievable outcome. Unfortunately, not even adults with fully developed cognitive faculties appear to be able to use their smartphones in this appropriate manner, with typical American adults checking their device an average of 144 times a day. That's once every 7.5 minutes during waking hours. The problem ultimately concerns biological habit formation. Habit formation begins with a concrete cue. Something in the world grabs our attention, say a short vibration from the phone. In response to this cue, we typically undertake a specific action, say checking for a new text message. In response to this cue-based action, the brain typically releases a small amount of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Cue, action, dopamine. Unfortunately, after undergoing this process several times, the brain will begin to preempt this cycle. This means the brain will begin releasing dopamine in response to the cue, long before any relevant action has been undertaken. Cue, dopamine, action. Here's the issue. When dopamine is released after an action has occurred, it typically feels rewarding. However, when dopamine is released before an action has occurred, it doesn't feel rewarding, it feels like a craving. In response to this biological urge, people are more likely to undertake a relevant action simply to calm their nervous system and engender a sense of relief. When it's reported that over half of American adults are addicted to their cell phones, what this means is that many of us have developed a habit cycle which drives us to regularly access our phone in order to combat the stressful sensation of craving. In fact, so finely tuned have we become to the cues generated by our mobile devices that over 60% of individuals report feeling phantom phone vibrations, even when their cell phone is switched off. If mature adults can't claim mastery over a tool, why would we think developing children should be able to accomplish this feat? Furthermore, despite proponents claiming that explicit instruction in smartphone etiquette is more effective than banning devices, there isn't a shred of published evidence I've ever seen to support that supposition. And this raises an important question. If neither adult modeling nor explicit instruction are effective strategies, then by what mechanism do we hope students will come to learn proper academic smartphone behavior? Osmosis? Assumption number 3. Banning anything in school is wrong, as it shields students from reality. Handguns, drugs, promiscuous clothing, derogatory language, sex, physical violence, pornography, streaming services, asbestos, dirty dancing, verbal bullying, racist paraphernalia. Need I continue? Since man first systematized the educational process, schools have banned those things deemed dangerous to student health or detrimental to student learning. In fact, the careful curation of behavior is the primary mechanism by which education ensures that students develop along trajectories deemed meaningful within particular societies. There is no question that smartphones are dangerous to student health. A recent review of over 50 research articles revealed a strong inverse relationship between recreational mobile device use and student mental well-being, with a particularly strong tie between social media use and the incidence of depression. A similar review showed that increased smartphone use leads to reduced physical activity, increased fat mass, reduced muscle mass, and increased incidence of physical ailments among students. There is also no question that cell phones are detrimental to student learning. A recent review of 44 research articles revealed that as smartphone use increases, academic performance on both daily assignments and summative exams decreases, with students who avoid smartphones almost universally outperforming students who employ them within the same classroom. To make matters worse, mobile devices appear to reduce academic attention, increase academic procrastination, and reduce academic self-regulatory behaviors. But what happens when we ban phones from schools? With regards to physical health, smartphone bans have shown to significantly increase the number and intensity of physical activities undertaken during recess and reduce the incidence of bullying inside schools. With regards to mental health, although short-lived periods of smartphone abstinence can certainly increase distress, akin to the first couple weeks of smokers giving up cigarettes, prolonged smartphone bans have been linked to improvements in student well-being, pupil conflict, and school satisfaction. With regards to student learning, smartphone bans have been shown to boost academic performance and test scores, with improvements ranging from 2 to 11 extra hours of learning per week. And perhaps most importantly, these benefits only arise when smartphones are strictly banned. Simply applying mobile device policies or behavioral standards does not appear to thwart student use or generate positive outcomes. Finally, as the list of banned items reveals, it's fully possible to prohibit things within schools without denying or shielding kids from the 16 hours of reality they experience each day outside the school ground. In fact, students use their digital devices on average 4 hours per day outside of class. If those 1,500 hours per year aren't enough to teach kids how a smartphone works, then I fail to see how additional practice at school can make any difference. In November of 2022, ChatGPT, a language model AI that can write compelling, human-like text with very little user input, was released to a largely unprepared public. Since then, a worldwide debate has raged concerning the ability of educators to effectively distinguish between human-made and artificially generated artifacts. But this debate misses the point. Whether or not teachers can detect the fingerprint of AI is only meaningful if school is viewed as a performance institution. If instead school is understood as a learning institution, then the debate of importance is whether or not students can correctly determine if engagement with AI has improved or circumvented their learning process. Unfortunately, history has revealed that students are notoriously bad at recognizing what helps and what hinders their learning. In fact, there's a phenomenon called the illusion of fluency, whereby students wrongly assume that the easier a learning activity is, the better they must understand the material. This overconfidence is only exacerbated by AI, which is incredibly easy to use and will doubtless lead many students to erroneously believe they possess deep knowledge, when in truth, they've learned very little. To argue that a novel digital technology like AI can be used to fix an educational system largely broken by the over-adoption of digital technologies is itself a rather dangerous logic. However, there are 3 particularly harmful arguments made concerning AI that, if accepted, will further impair student learning. Argument number 1, AI is an effective personal tutor that can drive individualized learning. Ever since the release of the world's first digital psychotherapist in 1966, pundits have mused about the possibility of AI replacing human beings in the therapeutic relationship. Needless to say, despite 5 decades of technological advance, corporeal mental health professionals continue to thrive, with estimates placing their positive impact on symptoms of depression and anxiety at 3 times and 5 times greater than their digital counterparts. Why has AI failed in this context? Because the operative word in therapeutic relationship is relationship. Decades of research consistently show that the relationship between therapist and patient is far and away the greatest predictor of therapeutic success, with some data suggesting 80% of positive outcomes being attributable to a strong empathetic relationship. The same holds true for learning. Individualized AI tutoring makes the fundamental error of viewing learning as primarily transactional. It conceives of students as basic Skinnerian if-then machines who will respond consistently and predictably to a particular set of stimuli. In truth, learning is interpersonal. The specific stimuli used to drive learning are secondary to the person delivering said stimuli. In fact, after analyzing data from thousands of different research studies, educational statistician John Hattie has reported that a strongly empathetic student-teacher relationship imparts 2.5 times greater impact on learning than personalized instruction. So what is required to develop empathy? The secret lies in the aforementioned hormone, oxytocin. When 2 individuals release oxytocin simultaneously, their brain activity begins to synchronize. This process, called neuronal coupling, is the neurological biomarker of empathy and leads individuals to not only learn from each other, but also to literally start thinking like each other. Unfortunately, seeing as computers have neither a brain nor oxytocin, it is strictly impossible for humans to develop an empathetic relationship with AI. By all means, we can laugh with AI, we can sympathize with AI, we might even develop a crude form of love for AI. but the transpersonal nature of empathy excludes the emergence of this particular cognitive pattern. This is undoubtedly one of the reasons why 85% of tuition-free students and over 50% of fee-paying students never complete online learning programs. Without empathy, individuals become passive receivers of information with little impetus to push through the inevitable struggles encountered along the learning process. Now, to be fair, not all human tutors are effective either. Even amongst those with deep knowledge and strong training, tutors who fail to build strong relationships with their students often end up impairing learning and driving some students to reevaluate their academic future. But this only serves as a further strike against AI, as it reveals that neither knowledge nor pedagogy, presumably the forte of digital tutors, are sufficient for effective tutoring. Context matters, and the empathy-free nature of AI eliminates the most meaningful learning context. Argument number 2. AI will allow for students to focus on higher-order thinking skills. In traditional schooling, students spend so many hours memorizing facts that they rarely have the opportunity to exercise higher-order cognitive skills, like critical thinking or creativity. Luckily, with the release of ChatGPT, which can access and organize all the world's knowledge in seconds, students can finally stop wasting time learning information and start focusing instead on the cultivation of their deeper reasoning abilities. This argument is hands down one of the most pernicious in all of education. It is an inescapable fact that in order for individuals to apply higher-order thinking skills to a set of facts, those facts must first be internally embedded within their long-term memory. As educational psychologist Paul A. Kirshner simply states, long-term memory is now viewed as the central dominant structure of human cognition. To clarify, let's do a quick experiment. I'm willing to bet that you possess a strong ability to critically think, and you employ this skill every day in your particular area of expertise. So with that in mind, I'd like you to try to resolve the following. Recently, magnetoencephalographic data was published that suggests the human brain generates a very low frequency wave, approximately 6 cph, detectable by squids that cannot be source localized, but appears to spread rostrally from the lingula to Brodmann's 10. Thinking critically, what does this data suggest about the process of ephaptic coupling within the brain? Unless you're a neuroscientist or an engineer, I'm guessing you weren't able to make heads or tails of this scenario. Now, ask ChatGPT to define the various terms above: squid, Brodmann's 10, ephaptic coupling. I'm certain that after doing this, you will be no closer to bringing your critical thinking ability to bear on this problem, as any information generated by AI will remain largely unusable until it's deeply encoded and organized within your prior knowledge structures. Put simply, having access to information does not obviate the need to learn that information if you ever hope to bring your skills to bear upon it. A similar experiment was conducted exploring the skill of reading comprehension. This experiment compared two groups: students who historically perform poorly on reading comprehension exams, low skill, but know a lot about baseball, high knowledge, and students who historically perform strongly on reading comprehension exams, high skill, but know little about baseball, low knowledge. After both groups read a passage outlining half an inning of baseball, the low-skill, high-knowledge group was able to correctly answer over twice as many comprehension questions and supply nearly 3 times as many meaningful details as the high-skill, low-knowledge group. And this pattern held firm even after allowing the latter group to explicitly seek out and access the definition of relevant terms. As cognitive psychologist Daniel T. Willingham succinctly puts it, the processes we most hope to engender in our students, thinking critically and logically, are not possible without background knowledge. This means using AI to help kids avoid memorizing information is the best way to ensure higher order thinking skills will never emerge. Argument number 3, AI can be used by students to aid in test preparation. A seemingly innocuous point made by enthusiasts is that students can use AI to generate practice problems in order to help study for exams. To see if this argument is valid, I recently asked ChatGPT to generate 10 multiple-choice questions on a topic I frequently teach: non-invasive electromagnetic brain stimulation technologies. Of the 10 questions produced, 1 was good, reflective of a question I'd actually use on an exam. 5 were far too easy, the answer was obvious based on the wording of the question itself, and 4 contained more than one valid answer, which wasn't picked up on when I asked ChatGPT to show me the correct responses. Riding this train to the next station, I proceeded to add some additional prompts. I explained to ChatGPT that I was an expert in this field and asked it to generate much harder questions. The results were worse. Of the 10 questions produced, 3 were good, 3 were still too easy, 1 contained more than one valid answer, and 3 were flat out wrong. In fact, one question didn't even make coherent sense with regards to the field of brain stimulation. Taking this journey to the terminus, I finished by adding additional prompts. I explained to ChatGPT that I was an expert in this field, specifically interested in the effective parameters of each different device. I then included 3 specific examples of the type of multiple choice questions I was hoping to receive. The results were nothing short of embarrassing. Of the 10 questions, 3 were good, 1 contained an incorrect answer that was wrongly labeled as correct, and 6 were complete gibberish. For example, one question asked which factors must be considered when selecting the proper brain region to stimulate, then the possible answers were simply 4 different brain regions. In the ultimate irony, the more detail I added to my ChatGPT prompt, the more nonsensical the output became. Now here's the problem. I was only able to pick out these many mistakes because I'm an expert, because I already possess the requisite knowledge needed to vet ChatGPT output. Students, by definition, aren't experts. They lack the type of deep knowledge required to meaningfully assess the validity of AI-generated text. In this specific instance, any student trying to use ChatGPT to prepare for one of my exams would not only have learned several incorrect facts, but also a myriad of completely meaningless concepts. When it comes to test prep, students would be far better served employing practice questions that have been developed by experts and previously vetted for accuracy and utility. Basically, those questions found in most textbooks that AI is ostensibly hoping to replace. I find it endlessly fascinating that those people in governmental departments and administrative roles who insist that education become more evidence-based are typically the same people who are completely willing to eschew evidence when it comes to the topic of digital technology in the classroom. In fact, a common argument I hear when discussing this topic runs something like this. When Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440, Luddites resisted. When Watt invented the steam engine in 1712, Luddites were skeptical. When Bell invented the telephone in 1876, Luddites swore it would never catch on. This is simply another example of fear masquerading as righteousness in the face of positive global change. Well, let's ignore for the fact that this argument blissfully omits DDT, mustard gas, the atomic bomb, CFCs, Agent Orange, styrofoam, new Coke, and the thousands of technological inventions that have undoubtedly resulted in a net loss for humanity. Ultimately, the problem with this logic is that it willfully feigns ignorance. When the printing press was invented, the public was right to be leery. However, after basic experience revealed that it was faster and more accurate than traditional scribes, we were justified in changing our mind and singing its praises. When the steam engine was unveiled, the public was right to be cautious. However, after basic experience revealed that it can run longer distances and carry greater loads than a traditional horse, we were justified in changing our minds and adopting this tool. When computers entered the classroom, the public was right to be suspicious. However, after nearly 4 decades of hard academic research has unequivocally revealed that these tools harm learning compared to traditional pedagogical methods, we are still being told that it's too early to claim that this emperor has no clothes. Rather, the public is being urged to sacrifice yet another generation of our children to this unregulated social experiment under the gratuitous hope that things might be different this time around. And if, God forbid, the data remains negative, then we can always simply redefine what effective learning means to make digital tools appear successful. The only reason I can surmise as to why so many people would ignore such a large body of research is vested interest. The global EdTech market is expected to surpass $400 billion annually by 2025, with 36 EdTech unicorns already in existence today. As noted earlier, each year the US government invests an estimated $33 billion on EdTech products and nearly $31 billion on digital learning systems for state schools alone. There are currently thousands of academics vying for hundreds of millions of dollars in EdTech research grants at universities around the world. It certainly would be a shame if this incredible expenditure of time, money, and resources was all for naught, or worse yet, was actually harming the educational landscape. This is the primary reason why data is willfully ignored and the blame for any downturn in academic outcomes is shifted to educators. If only teachers would spend more time learning how to properly employ EdTech products, then we would finally see those academic gains we've been promised for so long. The truth is that teachers are typically the first to adopt those emerging technologies that purport to boost student learning. Speak with any practicing educator and you'll be regaled with tales of the hours spent figuring out how to use digital whiteboards, which have largely been abandoned following the release of tablets. The sleepless nights dedicated to solving glitches with learning management systems, which the majority of students will never end up engaging with. The months wasted mastering ridiculous trends like Pokemon Go, AR goggles, and Google Glass, many of which are no longer supported by the very developers that insisted educators embrace them in the first place. Enough. As mentioned at the start of this piece, Sweden has recently announced a plan to move away from technology-dominated classrooms and return to a more traditional style of education. They're not simply banning smartphones, as countries like France and China have done. They are taking a whole-scale back-to-basics approach to learning. I implore the world to take this national experiment seriously. If the mechanisms outlined in this piece are accurate, and nearly a century of cognitive research suggests that they are, then there is every chance we will see a significant change in the teaching, learning, and well-being outcomes across Swedish schools. And my hope is that when this data comes out, whatever it may be, that it is not roundly ignored by those who cannot find a way to benefit from it monetarily.